Hey guys, it's Kiera and we're back to this core letter face. But this time, we're not going to be pen tooling it, but we're going to be using shapes in addition to the pen tool to create more accurate representations of what we're trying to create. So, I'm just going to reset Essentials again. We should have the same UI. I'm going to open up my Layers panel. Again, you can download this for free. That's the homework. And let's start blocking this out with shapes. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to left click and hold, grab the rectangle tool, and I'm just going to block out a rectangle. And I'm going to change the color to black. And perfect. So we have the stem of the R. Now we're going to try to get this curve that goes along the R. So we're going to do a circle for this. An ellipse tool. Again, click and hold, let go on the ellipse tool. And we're going to try to get something that lines up with this top point. And we're going to see how close we can get. Left click and hold, drag out a circle, hold shift to make sure that circle is proportional, and hold alt to make sure it goes from the center. And I'm going to see how close I can get. This seems to be pretty accurate. I'm going to let go, and that's that. So now we have two options on how we can actually get rid of the left side portion of the circle. We can either just pathfinder it, so we can create another rectangle on top of it and then just divide them. Or again, we can use a pen tool to actually delete some of the points that we don't need. So with the delete anchor point tool, I'm going to delete this anchor point, go to my direct selection, grab the handle and just bring it all the way to the center, and then grab this handle and bring it all the way to the center. Perfect. So we created this perfectly circular rim for the R. But now what we need to do is actually continue it so we have this space filled up. And again, we have two options. We can create another rectangle and then just join all the shapes together. Or we can actually extend this O to go all the way to the left. And I think that's what I'm going to do. I think it's going to be more economical in terms of how many anchor points we end up using. So I'm going to add an anchor point. But I'm not going to add one here, just because we want to keep this where it is right now, just because it's the start of a new curve. So I'm going to add a random anchor point right here, and a random anchor point somewhere here. What I'm going to be doing with these anchor points though, I'm going to drag it down. Illustrator is going to signify when it's on a perfectly horizontal line, and I'm just going to let go. So this is perfect. I'm going to click and hold, drag this up, and let go right here. And there we go. We just created another portion of the R. But right now we have a P, so we actually need to create this next stem. And I'm going to do the exact same thing by using some shapes. But if we actually block this out with a pen tool, we actually can control the width of this actual leg. In this case, I'm going to use the exact same width by taking the first rectangle that we created. I'm going to put it right on the bottom, and I'm just going to skew its top points. So I'm just going to select the first anchor point, the second anchor point, and just with my arrow keys, I'm going to do it all the way to the left. So this seems right about right. So I'm actually going to leave it the way it is. But on second thought, I actually just want to add a bit of width to it. It doesn't look too great like this. So I'm just going to grab this anchor point, and just move both of these to the right. And that's perfect. But now we have a second issue of this anchor point kind of being astray, and we want to kind of cut the shape. So now we actually have three options of how we can actually get rid of this. We can take this anchor point, click and drag, and Illustrator will just signify when we're going off the previous rectangle that we had. We can just click and drag like this. Or, if we were in a position like this before, we could add an anchor point, and then remove the anchor point we don't want. And it's going to give us the exact same result. And if we actually show the opacities of all these shapes, we can actually see that they're just overlapping and it's quite a bit of a mess. So I'm just going to select all these shapes, go to Window, Pathfinder, and we're going to merge them together. But if we do merge them together before we actually increase the opacity to 100%, the final result won't be at 100% opacity, and you'll have to layer over shapes over and over again just to bring it back to its original color So to avoid that entire mess of playing around with the opacities, we always want to keep it at 100% before we do any type of Pathfinder tool or any Pathfinder function. So I'm going to click and drag this to 100% and I'm going to merge them. Perfect. And I'm going to dim it just to see the little hole, the crevice that we have inside. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing except for the inner part of the R. So I think it's going to be smart if we start off with an ellipse. Illustrator is going to predict where we should put the center of it. So I'm going to click, hold shift to make sure it's proportional, hold alt to make sure it goes from the center. This seems about right, and I'm just going to push it all the way to the right. Perfect. So now again, we have two options. We can make a rectangle, or we can just skew the points of the circle. I already skewed the points of the circle in the last example, so I'm just going to create another rectangle. Illustrator does a prediction. It's perfecto. I'm done with that. I'm going to merge these two shapes. Merge. I'm going to make this opacity 100%, and I'm going to select both shapes, divide them, and with the indirect selection tool, I'm going to select the inner shape and press delete. And there we go. We just created a perfect R using shapes and the pen tool. They play hand in hand with each other. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing for the C and the O. And these might be a bit easier. So with the O, again, I'm going to create the outer rim. I'm going to dim the opacity. I'm going to create a copy, overlay it on its original position. And we could have actually done this, instead of actually copying and pasting it, we should have just done Command C, Command F, and it'll paste it in its original position. And I'm going to scale this down. This looks perfect. Select both, increase opacity, divide it, indirect selection tool, and just cut out the middle shape. And there we go. We have a perfectly and accurate letter O. And we're going to do the exact same thing for this shape. We can actually use the previous item that we made. Push it all the way to the right. I'm actually going to do the F function instead of the V function, just because I want it to be on the same sort of angle. I'm going to skew it in just slightly. I'm going to dim the opacity. And now we can actually see that we can actually use, well, if these actual points were a bit more on a 90 degrees, we could have just used a rectangle to skew it. But in this case, we're going to have to take that original rectangle idea, and we're going to have to change up the points just ever so slightly. So I'm going to rotate it by holding shift and zoom it all the way to the left hand side. So I'm going to decrease the opacity once more, and we see that these cuts on the actual C lead to the very center of the circle. So that means the rectangle's point on the left hand side also needs to line up with the actual center of the C. So I'm going to take the rectangle. So I'm going to count how many points we have to go down just to match it up with the previous C that we have, that we're trying to match it up to. And this looks perfect, and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. Perfect. Now I'm going to bring both opacities to 100% with the direct selection tool. I'm going to Pathfinder, and I'm going to cut away all these useless shapes. Perfect, we just created the C. And now we're just going to do the E. And this is going to be the easiest one, just because we're just going to use the rectangle over and over and over again. So Command C, Command V, we're going to flip it. And also notice how once I actually create a shape I like, I'm not going to try to recreate it, just because I'm trying to keep the widths as consistent as possible. So once we actually defined the width of this, Command C, Command F, bring it all the way down. Since these two technically have to be identical, Command C, Command F, bring it all the way up. And we're just going to cut how long it goes. And now we're just going to join all these shapes together, and we're done. The only thing that we have to do now for these shapes is that if you notice on the E, we have a bunch of points here, a bunch of anchor points that we don't really need. And in this case, let's say that we wanted to take this and we wanted to skew it all the way to the left. So we wanted to have like almost like an edge on this E. If we try to do that now, you would only get this little portion moving all the way to the left. And that's great if you only want that small portion, but if you wanted the entire slant to happen, then we need to remove all these little anchor points. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to the delete anchor point, and we're just going to start clicking away on these points. Zoom in, we're going to get rid of this point, and zoom all the way to the top, and remove this point. All the other letters look pretty much great. We're going to proof the R. The R looks great. Or actually, we can actually remove this point. It's pretty useless. The O looks pretty fine. And the C was a copy of the O, so that also looks fine. And that's great. So we just used the pen tool with the shape tool, and we got a really accurate result. And it was actually really fast as well. We weren't wasting a lot of time trying to create very detailed shapes with the pen tool. We just used the shapes as a block out, and then what we couldn't do with the shapes, we used the pen tool to just accent it. So I'll see you in the next lesson, and make sure to do the homework just so you're familiar with the pen tool, since most of the logos that we will be creating relies heavily on you being able to use the pen tool. So I will see you in the next lesson.